the Nebraska Cornhuskers looking to come in with the second year of Dylan Raiola and the third year of Matt Rhule. Joe, when you look at the Cornhuskers going into the season in 2025, how do you see things panning out?
My main area of focus is on Dylan Raiola. I don't think that this Nebraska team, and there's going to be a lot of comparisons between Raiola and Lagway because we're already seeing it. I don't think this Nebraska team is as talented as this Florida team, and we're going to be talking about them in a very different light. I have a lot of excitement. I have a lot of optimism for Dylan Raiola as a young, budding, promising quarterback. He didn't finish great down the stretch last year. But we saw lots of flashes of what he can be with a good roster around him when he's confident and when he's playing free. Like, I really think that the driving force for their success, as we see a lot of times in college football, great elite quarterbacks can boost average teams. I see a team that's got talent that needs their young quarterback to lead them. I'm going to talk about their schedule a little bit later, but there is a really strong chance for this team, if things go according to plan, with a couple of things that we'll dig into here, things go according to plan, like they're capable of being one of the top teams in the Big Ten this year. Probably not a playoff team, but still one of the better teams in the conference.
They do add some production here. Dan Key comes over from Kentucky, who, Joe, I got to be honest, I thought Mark Stoops did a really good job with Barian Brown and Dan Key, and they both hit the portal. Dan Key goes to Nebraska. Joe, if this kid and Raiola can get together, I mean, Dan Key had a damn good year last year with a quarterback that couldn't throw the ball further than 15 yards with any accuracy. He had 715 yards last year, which was his biggest season, but only 2 touchdowns. It will be very interesting to me now that I feel like that they have a guy who has shown that he can make productive plays against tough competition, what he can do with a quarterback that can actually throw him the football. The thing with me, though, offensively, and in the progression of Dylan Raiola, Joe, they're going to have to find a way to run the football at a much better clip. Listen to this. Last year, Nebraska was 96th in the country on offense in rushing. Joe, they had some games in there where, buddy, they were struggling to get to 50 yards rushing. 50.
That killed them.
Well, it also killed Dylan Raiola. He had 13 touchdowns and 11 interceptions. Joe, I don't know with this offensive line. I know you bring in Elijah Pritchett at right tackle. There's a reason Elijah Pritchett moved on from Alabama. Great players don't leave Bama, brother. They don't. I mean, I don't mean that in a wrong way to Elijah Pritchett, but they're going to pay top dollar for big-time offensive linemen. They have done that for a decade plus 2 decades. It's not going to happen. What can Elijah Pritchett be there? But, Joe, you got sophomores littered on that offensive line, either redshirt or true sophomores. And the question's going to be, how quickly have they developed? How experienced can they be? And do they know what they need to do in crunch time? Because if not, Raiola's going to be under pressure again. And, Joe, they cannot run the football. Now, normally in year 3, year 4-ish, this is where Matt Rhule starts to shine, right? This is where he starts to make his money. So this would be the year that you'll know that if Rhule can really take that step forward. John, I'm worried about their offensive line. I'm worried about them running the football, and I'm worried it affecting Dylan Raiola in a way that maybe statistically he's not one of the more upper echelon, but because he's on a team that can't protect him enough, maybe they don't take a step forward. That's number one for me offensively.
I definitely think that there's concern to be had with the O-line because I felt like that was where they fell short at times last year. Elijah Pritchett has talent, but as you mentioned, usually if a guy leaves Alabama, there's usually a reason. I think at the same time, though, them bringing in Rocco Spindler is very underrated. I think that he could be coming from Notre Dame, an experienced guy who just didn't fit into the lineup because they had a bunch of young guys that were going to step up and start over him. He can be a key contributor, a key piece for this offensive line getting better. I think that absolutely the run game needs to be better. It was where they fell extremely short. There's going to be a lot more explosiveness at receiver, especially with Dane Key. I think that he's going to be a much, much stronger piece.
And Isaiah Hunter, too.
Yeah. I think that their defense, like very sneakily, can be one of the better defenses in the Big Ten. Williams Nwaneri comes in as a former 5-star recruit. He's currently not projected to start on our lads, but I wouldn't be surprised if that doesn't change just because he's a super talented player. Deshaun McCullough, very athletic, rangy kid who's supposed to be playing that jack position for them. He's been a bit up and down in his career.
Yes.
I think that one thing that stands out to me, though, Blake, is that the willingness to bet on traits. Matt Rhule tried to do this with Eric Gilbert, and it didn't work. But going to guys that were once highly recruited, that are good athletes, that are coming from big programs, and giving them a shot. He's doing that with Deshaun McCullough. He's doing that with Elijah Pritchett. He's doing that again with Dane Key. There are opportunities to tap into that. It's a little bit of a risk-reward situation, but there is something to be gained from building a roster with that approach. And to some extent, it's produced success from in the past.
Yeah, and listen, I want to get to one more thing about offensively before I move to your point on defense. Isaiah Hunter, Dane Key. Here's the truth. They got some weapons now.
Yeah.
They have some weapons that they can utilize. Joe, I am terrified for them, though, and I mean this. I am absolutely terrified for them that I don't know if – because you might be able to be better, okay, than some of the other teams. Joe, they were 103rd in the country in scoring offense, 23.5 points per game, 103rd. To give you an idea how bad some of that was, Joe, Utah was 102nd. Utah. Okay? Think of how bad that defense was. Joe, Stanford is in the same category last year with Nebraska. And that thing, here's the best one. You ready? Michigan. They had a walk-on quarterback. They had 22 points per game. The point that I'm trying to make here is you got some guys that can make some explosive plays. You got to do everything humanly possible to keep 15 up, because if you don't, you're going to be in trouble. Joe, you brought something up about them defensively, and you specifically talked about them up front. Now, they do bring in 8 players defensively from the transfer portal. Joe, I think they got to continue to just do what they're doing defensively. If there's one thing that I am not going to push back on Nebraska on, it's going to be then defensively. 8th in the country last year in rushing defense. I think their secondary's got to be a little bit better. They gave up some long plays when it mattered most. Joe, people better go back and turn on that Ohio State Nebraska film. I think people saw Nebraska being 7-6 and said to themselves, man, this team ain't no good. And so when Ohio State gets in a dogfight with them, they're like, oh man, Ohio State's playing with their food. No. Joe, go pull up that box score for Nebraska and Ohio State and go back and watch that game. They gave them everything that they wanted. Joe, I'm not going to – look, I can come in here and say this guy doesn't have a lot of production. That guy doesn't have a lot of production. I'm not going to hit on a staff, and I'm not going to criticize them when they did a lot of the same exact things that they did a year ago, and you're producing a really damn good unit defensively. Need to be a little bit more athletic, I think, defensively. Mm-hmm. I think they get that with a guy like Williams Nwaneri. We'll see what they can do. Now, they do bring back Deshaun Singleton, the safety. Joe, he's a tackling machine. It's not going to light you up with stats, but he's going to come down in the box and absolutely blow your head off. I mean, just throwing this out there. Yeah. I saw Singleton in high school.
Was he a Louisiana kid?
For a time there, yes, at St. Helena. Okay. But, or to give you, I say like you would know, where Devonta Smith is from. Yeah, there were some time. I remember him being there and having time there. Joe, everybody missed on him. He had no SEC offers. He goes up to Nebraska. He will light your ask some dudes around Devonta Smith. Ask Devonta Smith's cousin, because my mom taught him in high school. He will blow your head off. I mean, this kid will light you up. So defensively, I don't know how worried I am about them.
One of the guys that I think is super underrated too on this defense, Cameron Lendhart, is a guy who I tracked as a freshman defensive tackle. I broke down his film, evaluated him when I was working and recommending prospects to agents, and he was one of the guys that caught my attention early on. He was an early contributor as a freshman, didn't play a ton, but you saw the athleticism. This is a year going into year 3 of his career as a junior where he can take that step. When you've got a guy that's been this athletic, that's been building his body, getting stronger, developing his technique, all of those things, this is a time when a guy like him could end up being a surprise, shocking player who ends up being one of the better defensive tackles in the Big Ten. I think that he's a very underrated piece. And I think that goes to say this defensive line could be a lot better than we're expecting. We don't really know the names. You know, the general national public, and the reason why I like doing these previews is that we get to kind of learn the roster a little bit more. We help teach other fans of the sport what you need to know. I know for a fact that most Big Ten fans, and especially most SEC fans and other fans in other conferences, don't know who a guy like Cameron Lenhart is. You know, there's a lot of potential to be had there.
You know, you bring that up, and we just got done talking about Nebraska defensively. Joe, the interesting thing about you bringing up Lenhart and that defense, here's the thing. When I look at them just as a whole, okay, and we bring up Singleton, we bring up Lenhart. Lenhart, okay, in 13 games, Joe, the stats are not going to stand out to you. But it's the same kind of deal to some extent, not on this level of steroids, but how Caleb Banks did not have the stats, but you turn on the film and then there you go. Right. And it's like, okay, if you're paper watching, then good on you. But you better turn on that film and you better turn it on very quickly. Man, I think they're going to be fine defensively. But the problem is, Joe, they can't be on the field as much as they were last year. Go look at the splits between offense and defensive time and possession, and go look at how much on the field Nebraska's defense was. It's insane. It cannot happen. It's the same thing that happened with Michigan. The same exact thing. You got to be able to convert on third downs, to move the sticks, and keep a really talented defense off the field. That is the goal. And Joe, here's why I don't think I'm going to be that high on them this year. You're going to have to show me that you can run the football to keep them off the field. I don't care what anybody tells me. There's one thing that has not changed in all the chaos that we've seen in college football. Joe, what teams lost last year when it mattered most? They could not run the football. What were the teams? It's the one centric theme when we talk about ball in general. If you can't run that rock, you are in trouble as a team, as an outright team. LSU fell. Texas fell. Georgia fell. Why? Joe, they couldn't line up and get 5 yards when they needed it. Literally could not do it. So I know that that's the SEC, but it still has a problem with Nebraska.
Well, it applies more in the Big Ten, if anything.
Well, but they couldn't do it in the Big Ten. My only point here was this. Joe, I've heard millions of quarterbacks, not literally, but thousands of quarterbacks. Peyton Manning on Monday Night Football. We got to get this running game going. It helps out a young QB. Joe, if Raiola's going to have success, he's going to be able to have the hold on that rock. Now, here's the question on that. They went to Dana Holgorsen and kept him for a second year. I don't know if they even want to, if I'm being honest.
You think that they're just going to go try and air it out like crazy?
I do, because
it's plausible. You can't do that shit in November, but it's plausible.
Why is no air raid teams defensively, Joe, top defensively? Why does it never happen?
Because they're on the field too long.
They're on the field too long. Joe, you had that 2019 LSU team. Mm-hmm. Derek Stingley, Grant Delpit. Name the dudes that were out there. Kerry Vincent, all starters in the NFL. Patrick Queen, Jacob Phillips. Name all of them. Want to know why they didn't have a top defense? They were scoring too goddamn quickly. They were off the field too goddamn quickly. You want to know why Derek Stingley, one of the best scorers in the NFL right now, had troubles? He was exhausted. Yeah. I mean, like, what do we like? Here's how I feel. You know how when we talk about chemistry in teams, I feel like everything that you build defensively does not match up to what you're trying to build offensively. You're hiring a coordinator in reference to Dana Holgorsen to build off of a quarterback instead of what is best for your team.
I understand that sentiment, but can we talk about the real craziness that is their schedule this upcoming year? We've talked about a lot of teams that have easy schedules. They have
let's talk about it.
An insane schedule. Cincinnati versus Akron versus Houston Christian versus at home Michigan, bye week versus Michigan State. So they haven't had an away game yet. At Maryland, at Minnesota, those are their first 2 away games. Versus Northwestern, versus USC, at UCLA, that's their one West Coast trip. At Penn State versus Iowa. They do not play Indiana, Oregon, or Ohio State. They don't have to go to Washington, and they only have one trip where they have to travel to go to play UCLA of all teams, which is certainly beatable because we're not that high on this UCLA program. Maybe they're good with Nico, but whatever. There is a world. I'm a lot higher on Nebraska than you are. There is a world going into
Don't say it.
that Penn State game that they could be undefeated. There's legitimate, this roster's nothing special. I'm being very honest. This is not a top 5 roster in the Big Ten right now. It's not. And Nebraska fans, I hope that you guys have enough self-awareness to understand that too. I think that Nebraska fans are smart football fans to realize that there are holes compared to some of these other teams. But if Indiana can make it as far, people keep trying to bring up how who could be the next Indiana this year that has a really easy schedule that ends up having a really good record. I think it could be Nebraska. That Penn State game is probably not going to go very well. It's probably not. And we're probably going to, after that game, be sitting debating, should Nebraska get into the college football playoff if things go as well as they could? But tell me where are the games that for certain they're not winning outside of that Penn State game?
That they're for sure not winning.
Out of all the games I just named there.
I don't know if they're outright going to beat Michigan.
They get them at home with a freshman quarterback.
Outright?
I think Michigan's going to be better, but they've got a lot of stuff to figure out. That's week 4.
Nebraska doesn't?
Nebraska's at least in year 2 of their quarterback.
Hold on. Pause. That defensive line that we saw obliterate Elijah Pritchett in a bowl game, yeah, I do think that that Michigan could get after that ass. Joey allowed 3 sacks.
I understand that there's going to be a lot of turnover with this Michigan defense. I don't think we've done a Michigan preview.
Yeah, we haven't.
There's a lot of turnover.
All right. I'm going to let the Nebraska fans hate me today. Here we go. Matt Rhule, you're out here talking about you're taking shots at the SEC with about 9 conference games, and this is your schedule?
Okay, forget that for a second.
No, I'm not going to. And you know
you're
what?
You're playing to my point, though. You're playing to my point. This is a 10-2 schedule.
I am playing to your point, but I've been waiting all day to tell you this. At the end of the show, I will be tweeting out something about Matt Rhule, and I will be bringing up the schedule. You keep bitching about 9 conference games, and this is your fucking schedule? Spare me, big dog. Spare me. Well, I do agree with you on one thing.
Yeah.
They're probably going to be in playoff eliminator games because they're going to beat up on some of these teams. Does Jonathan Smith and Michigan State figure something out? I don't know where those teams are going to be. But here's what I know. Your offensive line keeps getting dominated like that, and you're not winning shit.
That's understandable, but I don't think that there are 3 games on here that have formidable defenses potentially. Michigan, maybe USC, and definitely Penn State. The rest of these defenses, nothing truly scares me about any of these defenses. Maybe Michigan State is suddenly better. There's nothing scary on this.
It's weak. It's weak.
My point, 10-2.
Because Maryland's lost a lot. Northwestern's Northwestern.
10-2. I'm telling you right now, 11-1.
They're not going 10-2. They're not going 10-2. I'll give you 9-3. I'm not conceding 10-2. They're not making the playoff.
All right. I think it's possible.
You think Nebraska's going to the playoff?
They have a better. It doesn't matter if they're one of the best teams in the country. We spent a whole 20 minutes talking about strength of schedule.
Well, let me ask you this before we get out of here.
Okay.
Then do they deserve it?
That's not the point. No,
Oh,
they probably. I literally just said that they won't be one of the 12 best teams in the country. They won't, but they're going to have one of the best records at the end of the year. They probably will if this goes according to plan.
I would want to play that schedule.
I think most teams would.
You think on Big Ten Radio right now that they're going to be when this is on XM Radio? You think they're going to be yelling at us?
Probably. Well, they're going to be yelling at you. I got the right take.
I will not concede. We'll see you tomorrow, man. Not tomorrow. What am I doing?
No, we're back tomorrow.